So the President of the United States, obviously very direct. He's disappointed that the ceasefire was breached. And it was, as far as I could tell, the ceasefire was breached by the Iranians. And what the Israel did was within their rights. They had 12 hours before it ended. They got some targets to finish up. So I think the president said in the spirit of ceasefire, he could have leveled off a little. But it doesn't seem like Israel actually violated the ceasefire. But Iran, they did. The IDF now will strike back, according to the defense minister, Israel Katz.
Well, I think what you're saying from this president is he likes being in the middle with conflicts. He likes to be the negotiator there. I think when it came down to the Iran situation, he was very clear they couldn't have a nuclear weapon. But I think his point is, when I said ceasefire, don't wait up all the way into the moment till the clock runs out. He didn't like seeing that as well. He's clearly frustrated this morning. You know, he doesn't like the coverage. He feels like that they're not celebrating our great military and the successful mission that they had from the other networks, and I think he's right on that.
Well, I mean, it reminds me of Marco Rubio over the weekend was being interviewed by one of the networks, and he said, I think I know more than you do.
Yeah,
exactly, because I have the intel. He's the president of the United States. He has the intel, so it should give you peace of mind when you hear him say that the nuclear facilities that we targeted are gone, obliterated, under rocks, he says. He said they are gone, and Iran will never rebuild their nuclear facilities. And he was thanking the B-2 pilots and wants apologies from other networks who were saying, we're not sure if these nuclear sites were obliterated, but it should give you peace of mind when you hear our president say that they are, that the mission was successful.
But here's the question. Where do you go from here? As Mark Levin wrote last night, he was upset by this. He said, we didn't give a lifeline to Hitler. That's how bad these guys are. They've lost their Air Force. They have no ground-to-air protection. China didn't step in. Russia didn't step in. Not a single Arab country stepped in. The supreme Nazi is hiding in a bunker, much like Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler wasn't thrown a lifeline. He wasn't thrown a lifeline. He was going to be killed, so he committed suicide. So that's what, even though the ceasefire is to be lauded, if they stay in power, are we postponing another conflict? For example, are we going to lift the sanctions? If we lift the sanctions, they're going to get some money. And if they get some money, are they not going to fund Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Houthis? Again, foment terror, sleeper cells here. What did Iran say to make you think that they have anything but hatred for us and Israel? But
isn't it up to the Iranian people to decide who their leader will be? I know that many of them are too scared to go up against the Ayatollah. But well,
I'm not saying that we should. I'm just saying that if he stays in power,
right,
is our security in jeopardy? And does Israel's remain in jeopardy?
Absolutely. He yells death to America.
I think one of the complicated things is that this is a president that continues to say he wants to be the president of peace. And Brian, we talked about this on your radio show. It's hard to get peace with a group of people that have such a radical ideology, that hate your very existence.
Just one side.
There. I mean, yeah. It's just the truth. They don't want Israel to exist. They don't want us to exist. They hate the West. And it's kind of hard to negotiate with people that believe that you're an infidel.
Yeah.
They don't have to tell you the truth.
Indoctrination.
Right.
They've had it their entire lives, been told that.
Exactly right. Here's the great hope I have. It is really one country that's a problem. Syria, they're trying to rebuild. We've released sanctions. You know that in Syria, they got huge billboards. Thank you, President Trump. So why? Because they're giving them a chance. Egypt is not a problem. Bahrain is not a problem. Qatar is not a problem. UAE is not a problem. Saudi Arabia is not a problem. What is the problem? It's that country. And the question is, do you give them a lifeline? And because do they have a choice but to step down? The fact that the Ayatollah said we're going to give just a symbolic shot at the U.S. and then can we talk? Yeah, absolutely take advantage of it. But you know what's got to be included in that? You got to be including that you cannot fund the proxies. You cannot have ballistic missiles. You certainly can't have a nuclear program. Right. And, you know, if something happens here with a sleeper cell, Iran's directly responsible. They have to be aware that we know that.
The president on his way to Air Force One, he said to the reporters, as soon as I finished talking with you, basically, it sounded like he's going to call Benjamin Netanyahu and try to work this out. Alexandria Hoff is live at the White House with the latest for us. Hey, Alex.
Hey, good to be with you. Yeah, the president, he is angry. He is mad. He is mad at both sides here, making that abundantly clear. I mean, you heard the profanity that he had used. He mused at one point point that, yes, there might have been some proxies, some tagger-alongers on the Iranian side who might have not adhered to this ceasefire. But either way, he is upset that Israel has reacted so quickly to this when he thought that this was really their opportunity, that he would come in and broker a ceasefire, which could still happen, as we know. I mean, this could just be, as Mike Tobin was talking earlier, the kind of ping-ponging that can happen when there is a deadline on a ceasefire. But either way, President Trump is highly frustrated. He's frustrated, and something I could sense was he expressed some frustration at some of the media portrayals of the effectiveness of Saturday's Operation Midnight Hammer in debilitating Iran's nuclear capabilities. And he sees some of that as disrespectful to those B-2 pilots. But I think he is also saying here that Iran and Israel are disrespecting the actions of those American heroes who had gone out there on that 30-plus hour mission to help accomplish what President Trump was optimistic last night that could happen. There could be peace between countries that historically there is a chance there never could be in many ways. But, you know, as you heard the president say, they've been fighting for so long that they're just in such a tornado of emotions with something like this that they can't stop themselves from continuing to fight. So the president right now, he is heading to Amsterdam. He left the White House here about a half hour ago now. He's going to arrive in Amsterdam around 1 p.m. This will be for the first NATO summit of his presidency. I want to, though, get back a little bit into what is kind of leading up to all this, because there were some people who last week would have thought, or this weekend, thought he might not even head on this trip now. But he said that really he was optimistic last night. So you have to look at these emotions from last night and then into this trip today. It's a pretty long journey. But he thought that this was an end to the 12-day war, as he had called it. And if it was so, and if it would work out as it should, he said it would be something saluted by the world. And more has come into focus from yesterday afternoon until now in terms of Iran's retaliatory strike on the American air base in Qatar. The administration and really the rest of the world considers this to be a show and a wink away from Iran to tell its people that they hit back at the U.S. without truly making impact. I'm going to read a Truth Social now that the president, when he really kind of explained what was going on here, he said, quote, Iran has officially responded to our obliteration of their nuclear facilities with a very weak response. I want to thank Iran for giving us early notice, which made it possible for no lives to be lost and nobody injured. Now, that Iran had launched at least 14 missiles toward that base, which were intercepted and destroyed by Qatar. One of them just didn't hit. So not a bad exchange for the U.S., which through Operation Midnight Hammer Saturday was able to obliterate, according to the White House, Iran's nuclear capabilities. So when it comes to The Hague and President Trump being at the NATO summit, I mean, this is going to be I don't want to say tense, maybe. I don't know if it's tense or as tense as it could have been, but we have two wars still happening right now. Israel, Iran, also Russia and Ukraine. Both of them, President Trump has been trying to be a brokering asset in both. And it's the first NATO summit of his second term. So he's going to arrive there tonight. That's really going to get going tomorrow. There is some positive news here on the defense spending side, because one of President Trump's goals going to The Hague was convincing allies to increase their defense spending to 5%, to make this a pledge among allies. And what we're hearing right now, that it appears that those member countries will be doing so, all of those members aside from Spain. Guys, we'll send it back to you.
Yeah, Spain. Oh, go ahead.
No, real quick, Alex, because you were there.
Yeah.
The president was clearly angry. Was it a question that was posed to the president, or was he angry more about the conflict that was happening between Israel and Iran?
Yeah, I don't think the question prompted the frustration and the anger there. This was something he was ready to express. I think whether the question was asked or not, he had posted on social media as well to Israel, do not drop those bombs. Like, this is up to you now. You are the power force in this. Hold back.
Now, but was Israel responding? Okay, so there's ceasefire. And then was Israel just responding after they were attacked again by Iran?
And yeah, that's how Israel is explaining it, that they're saying that Iran broke this ceasefire and that they have no choice but to respond. And President Trump is saying you do.
Right. Thanks so much, Alex. Here's the exact Truth Social post. Israel, do not drop those bombs. If you do, it is a major violation. Bring your pilots home now, Donald Trump. So just get this clear. He did not like the pace of the bombing as Israel looked to finish off as many targets as possible by 4 a.m. But it was Iran that broke the ceasefire deadline. Now it's Israel that's answering back. and they said, Israel Katz, we're hitting back. So to me, this could be a skirmish, but Iran didn't clarify. Iran said we didn't do it. Well, believe me, one thing Israel's good at is picking out who's bombing them because they have so much practice. They would know for sure if this was the Houthis. They knew the direction it was coming. It seems to us from the outside, seems like a mistake on Iran's part, one that necessarily wasn't green lighted by the headquarters to me, because there's no benefit from them violating the ceasefire. They need it much more than Iran needs. Israel needs it. And the other thing is, I actually don't think I think if Israel had their choice, they'd never be fighting. It's not two people who forgot what they're fighting about. It is one country that made it their mission to destroy another country, and that country is fed up, and they said, we are going to take you on, and we're going to take out your surrogates first. They did that. They're taking them on, and while they were on a respirator, they got a ceasefire. So they got their oxygen masks.
So let's get the read from the ground. This is all moving very quickly. Mike Tobin joins us live from Israel with the latest. Mike, what are you learning about this? Is there any response from the Israelis based on the president's comments just here recently at the top of the hour?
Well, let's look back on the president's comments as we saw this flurry of airstrikes followed by missile strikes here in Israel. Some of those missile strikes in the lead up to the ceasefire deadly. We had somewhat of a benign missile strike that violated the ceasefire. And one thing they've resulted in is a very frustrated president of the United States.
I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that.
Israel says it was actually 2 rockets. An infuriated defense minister, Israel Katz, said the following: I have instructed the IDF to respond forcefully to Iran's violation of the ceasefire with high-intensity strikes of regime targets. So a clear indication that Israel is intending to retaliate today. Now, the destruction that you see behind me, this came right at the end as the ceasefire was supposed to take hold. A massive missile that came from Iran. If you look over my shoulder here, you can see the impact site where the base of that ladder is hooked into this apartment building. There was a family that was sheltered or that was in their bomb shelter. They took a direct hit. These bomb shelters do a good job protecting people in the blast radius, but the people cannot survive when they take a direct hit from some of these massive warheads that we have seen the Iranians pull out of their arsenal. Now, Israel did fire back at a couple of the missile launchers. One of the things a police spokesman noted here today is that Israel fires back at military targets. Iran has been firing at the civilian population.
These are civilian neighborhoods. There's no army base right around us in the immediate vicinity. There's no sensitive security site. They're hitting hospitals, places of worship. Be'er Sheva, which is an area that has a mixed community of both Muslims and Jews. These targets have no direct religion in their crosshair. The only thing in their crosshair is our civilians.
So we have 4 people who were killed at this location, 26 people wounded. The extent of their injuries really varies. Aggravating situation with the 2 missiles that came in after the ceasefire, and you have a very aggravated president of the United States trying to calm the 2 parties down. Guys, back to you.
So, Mike, there were fatalities in this missile strike, right?
From Iran.
There were fatalities in the missile strike behind me from Iran, 4 of them, 26 injuries. But keep in mind, this is a missile strike that came in really as the ceasefire was about to take hold. We often see these flurries of activities right before a ceasefire. This was an impact from that. Don't confuse this with the 2 missiles that came in about 4 hours after the ceasefire.
Okay.
Gotcha. And they know the difference between the Houthi rebels' long-range missiles and Iran. Said there's never been much confusion about that, right?
When the Houthis fire, it comes up the Red Sea. You can see it. They're detected in the Israeli town of Eilat, right down there in the south, and that's usually where the interception will occur. A lot of these Iranian missiles have gone into the north. There's the off chance that someone sympathetic to Hezbollah could have fired it in the north, but we would know that at this point. There would be indications to that effect.
All right, Mike.
So it's definitely been confirmed it was from Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
Thank you, Mike.
To be fair, I think Israel's strong response had to do with 4 of their people dying. 4 civilians died, and that's why they continue to rain.
I think it's them saying there's a ceasefire, you didn't adhere to it, so we're going to get you back.
Well, the loss of life happened before the ceasefire.
Right.
Yeah. And I think their response is like, we're going to go right up to the end of the line of this.
Right. I will say this, Steve Witkoff just canceled, so we're not going to have him on later.
He's a little busy this morning.
One of the stories was that Hamas and Israel were going to meet in Qatar. Because you forget about that. He goes, if Iran can settle down, we'll do that. So a lot of moving parts today, and enough for the mediator to have to cancel with us.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.